The White House and Congress battle over a nuclear deal with Iran. And should Congress grant the president the power to fight ISIS? House Foreign Affairs Committee member Congressman Ron DeSantis joins us. And later, with the St. Patrick Day parade around the corner and an archbishop under fire for defending church social teaching, Bill Donohue is here. The Catholic League president will also share the secret to health, happiness, and heaven, and discuss his new book, The Catholic Advantage. Finally, as California considers a bill to legalize physician-assisted suicide, founder and pastor of Saddleback Church in California, Rick Warren, reacts and talks about his latest collaboration with the Diocese of Orange. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. The fastest hour on air and an all-star lineup is coming up. Congressman Ron DeSantis, Bill Donohue, and Rick Warren are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo, and I'll be live tweeting throughout the show. Or drop us an email at worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. In Syria, the Islamic State has attacked a string of Christian villages along the Kabur River, and even more Christians have been kidnapped. The river valley is home to tens of thousands of Assyrian Christians. As many as 370 were abducted late last month after ISIS overran several communities there. In spite of the killings, or kidnappings rather, ISIS is not necessarily targeting Christians. Instead, the area is a key transportation corridor linking ISIS militants in Syria to those in Iraq. Some news outlets and NGOs are reporting that a few of those previously kidnapped were released this week. Precise numbers are hard to confirm, perhaps a few small busloads, according to one church source. Meanwhile, the Islamic State's rampage of Iraqi antiquities continue. According to a government official, ISIS blew up a 10th century Chaldean Catholic church in Mosul. The destruction comes in the wake of ISIS looting and bulldozing the ancient cities of Nimrud, which is referenced in Genesis, and 2,000-year-old Hatra, the capital of the first Arab kingdom. Last month, Islamists desecrated and destroyed ancient artifacts and relics that were housed in the Mosul Museum. What a cultural loss. And Chaldean Catholic Patriarch Louis Raphael Sacco is urging the Iraqi government and the international community to act quickly and to help Iraqi refugees. He's asking them to protect innocent civilians and to offer necessary lodging, food, and medications to the afflicted. He warned the latest battles between Iraqi forces and ISIS threatens to deteriorate from bad to worse and intensify the already desperate situation for Christians throughout the Nineveh Plain. Meanwhile, the New York Times is reporting that the Islamic State has gained a foothold in Libya. The jihadi militants now dominate the major Mediterranean port city of Sirte. This is where the 21 migrant Egyptian workers were kidnapped before they were executed last month. ISIS has taken advantage of the weak central government and the warring factions in the region. More on ISIS and Iraq, Iran's growing regional dominance, and U.S. foreign policy in our next segment. Meanwhile, in Rome, Pope Francis is taking the purported ISIS threats against his life in stride. When asked about the threats in an interview with an Argentinian daily, the Holy Father said, "Life is in the hands of God. I told the Lord, if your plan is that I die or that they do something to me, I ask only one favor, that they do not hurt me, because I'm a big coward when it comes to physical pain." End quote. Back here in Washington, Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid took to the Senate floor on Wednesday, threatening to block a bipartisan human trafficking bill. The Democrats' leader's problem? He wants the legislation to fund abortions. The Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act passed out of the Judiciary Committee unanimously last month. The bill both strengthens enforcement of sex trafficking laws and establishes a fund that helps victims, many of whom are trafficked minors. But this week, Reed said if language prohibiting those funds from being used for abortions is not removed, then it, quote, will not pass. We cannot have this legislation hijacked by an abortion issue. And the University of Notre Dame's lawsuit against the HHS contraceptive mandate was given new life this week. On Monday, the U.S. Supreme Court ordered a lower court to reconsider its decision that would have compelled the university to offer free birth control and abortifacient coverage to its employees. The Seventh Circuit Court of Chicago is to reconsider its ruling in light of the Supreme Court's recent Hobby Lobby decision. Now, that ruling accommodated corporations with religious objections to the contraceptive mandate. And the Templeton Prize for affirming life's spiritual dimension through insight, discovery, or practical works has been awarded to Jean Vanier. Inspired by his Catholic faith, Vanier founded L'Arche, which grew into a worldwide network of communities where those with and without intellectual disabilities live and work together. Operating on the premise that the weak enable the strong to see their own vulnerabilities, Vanier established a home outside of Paris for himself and two intellectually disabled men in 1964. His goal thereafter became creating places where those caught up in the world of success and those who are in need could come together in a, quote, transformative experience. L'Arche now has nearly 150 residential communities in 35 countries. He credits it all to Providence. And several Catholic organizations in Norfolk, Virginia have withdrawn from the Knights of Columbus St. Patrick's Day parade in protest. They're protesting the inclusion of Governor Terry McAuliffe, who was selected as Grand Marshal. The Democrat governor, who is Roman Catholic, has vowed to block pro-life legislative efforts and is also the first Virginia governor to preside over a same-sex wedding. At least 6 schools and a church won't participate in the parade, which is organized by the Regional Council of the Knights of Columbus. The boycott is being backed by Virginia's 2 Catholic bishops. In a joint letter, Bishops Francis Di Lorenzo of Richmond and Paul Laverdi of Arlington, who is also the Knights of Columbus state chaplain, said it is an erroneous and serious mistake in judgment for any Catholic organization to grant awards, honors, or platforms to any public person who clearly acts in defiance of Catholic teaching. They added that the Knights' invitation to McAuliffe was done without their advice or consent, or that of the local parish priest or state council. More on this and the controversy surrounding New York City's St. Patrick's Day parade later in the show. And Cardinal Edward Egan, the former Archbishop of New York, was laid to rest on Tuesday. He died unexpectedly this past week of cardiac arrest. He was 82. The Illinois native was named Archbishop of New York by St. John Paul II in 2000. After serving as Bishop of Bridgeport, Connecticut. His successor, Cardinal Timothy Dolan, presided over the funeral mass, which, per Cardinal Egan's instructions, remained focused on God, the Mass, and the faith, and not him personally. May Cardinal Edward Egan rest in peace. And in Rome, the Vatican has confirmed that stolen documents written by Michelangelo have been offered back to the Holy See for a ransom, more than $100,000. The documents relate to Michelangelo's work on the construction of St. Peter's Basilica. The letters had been stolen from Basilica archives sometime before 1997. According to the Italian daily Il Messaggero, a former Vatican employee recently contacted Cardinal Angelo Comastri, the archpriest of St. Peter's Basilica, offering to return the Michelangelo papers. The cardinal refused to pay the ransom and reported the incident to the Vatican police. The letter is apparently a rare example of Michelangelo's handwriting and contains his signature. And speaking of great artists, did Vincent van Gogh include a secret homage to Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper in one of his own masterworks. Journalist Todd Van Luling believes it's possible. Van Gogh's iconic painting, Café Terrace at Night, depicts patrons enjoying a pleasant evening at a bistro, but on closer inspection, the patrons are being served by a curiously robed waiter. Count the patrons. Sure enough, there are 12, one of whom is a shadowy figure in a doorway who could represent Judas. Symbols of a cross appear in the window behind the central figure, and the lantern above could serve as his halo. Religious illusions would not be out of character for Van Gogh. Before becoming an artist or cutting off his ear, Van Gogh had wished to, quote, preach the gospel everywhere. His father was a Dutch Reformed church pastor. When we return, Congress is at odds with the president over a possible Iranian nuke deal, while the Islamic State continues its violent rampage in the Middle East. A member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee joins us to discuss it all in a moment. The World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Live. 47 U.S. Republican senators wrote an open letter to Iran warning the country about any nuclear agreement with the U.S., while President Obama's request for military action against the Islamic State is facing opposition by a divided Congress. Here to explore it all is a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Congressman Ron DeSantis, who joins us from Jacksonville, Florida. Congressman, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, the administration is requesting authorization from Congress to fight a military operation against ISIS. Why not grant it to them?
Well, it's interesting. When the president announced strikes against ISIS last September, he said, I think correctly, that he had the authority to act based on both the 2001 AUMF that was signed after 9/11 and the 2002 AUMF for Iraq. And so what he's proposed now to a lot of Republican members, including myself, appears to be an LUMF, a limitation on the use of military force, because there are certain restrictions as to the time that we can be engaged against ISIS and the capacity to use ground forces. And I'm somebody that thinks even if you don't intend to use ground forces, I think it's a mistake to telegraph to the enemy, hey, here's what we won't do and here's how long we'll stay. And so I think there's opposition from a lot of the Republicans in Congress because we view it as a limitation. And then I think some of the Democrats, they view it as, well, this could allow the president to do more than we want. They want an extremely limited authorization. So I don't know if he was trying to thread the needle, but I don't think that this is necessarily something Congress is going to rally around right now.
Now, the administration says, look, we need to present a united front, and the reason the president is placing a 3-year limitation is so that the American people can decide as he leaves office the best option to pursue or whether to pursue ISIS at all. What's wrong with that reasoning?
Well, look, I think as a fundamental level, why would you want to limit the authority? Number two is, if he already has the existing authority based on the previous AUMFs, it doesn't really make sense why you would cake over that with this new authority or the new limitations on the authority. And so I'm just not sure that it makes a lot of sense. And I think also there's this issue as you've watched this unfold with ISIS, as America has dropped bombs on ISIS for sure. Most of the fighting on the ground being done that's effective against ISIS is being done by Iranian-backed Shiite militias.
Right.
You have the commander of the Quds Force, which is the special ops arm of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, Qasem Soleimani. He's directing these operations in Tikrit, which is Saddam Hussein's homeland, historically a very Sunni city. Soleimani and these Shiite militias, when guys like me were in Iraq during the 2006, 7, 8 period, they killed hundreds and hundreds of U.S. service members. They had very significant EFP devices, which are more powerful than a typical IED. So, and I think Prime Minister Netanyahu, when he was in front of the Congress last week, he made a good point. Yes, you need to defeat ISIS, but if your strategy to defeat ISIS elevates Iran, and Iran is the dominant power in the region, and Iran is controlling Iraq, well, you may have won the battle, but you may have lost the war, because at the end of the day, Iran has a very similar ideology to ISIS.
Let's talk for a moment about Iran. The United States is now in open conversation with the Iranian Republic. They are trying to make a deal about limiting their nuclear program over a 10-year period. Here's the question. Does reducing the sanctions, once you reduce the sanctions, lift the sanctions on Iran and give their economy a break, how do you police that whatever restrictions they're promising on their nuclear program, how do you enforce it?
Well, I don't think you do. And I think that the point is that if this is just an executive agreement, if the president's not going to submit it to Congress, it's not binding on the American government. A new president could change it, Congress can override it, and if it's not binding on the United States, why would Iran feel that they were bound by it? So I think they absolutely would be able to cheat and continue to pursue nuclear weapons. Part of the problem, though, with the agreement is if they actually kept the agreement for 10 years, they would still potentially get a nuclear weapon. And so in many ways, they could get a weapon by violating the agreement, and they could get a weapon by keeping the agreement at the end of that 10-year period. And so that is something that is very concerning to a lot of members of Congress. And I think Prime Minister Netanyahu made a very strong case that this is simply not sufficient to deny Iran a nuclear weapon.
Congressman, I want to play you something. This is Secretary of State John Kerry, who is leading the delegation on Sunday in Switzerland to craft some deal with the Iranians. Here was his reaction to the suggestion that you just shared with our audience, that Congress should have to approve any agreement. Listen.
It's incorrect when it says that Congress could actually modify the terms of an agreement at any time. That's flat wrong. They don't have the right to modify an agreement reached executive to executive between leaders of a country.
Your reaction to that?
Well, I don't think that that's accurate. I think if the Congress were to, for example, reimpose tough sanctions, the president could absolutely veto that, but the Congress can then turn around and override the president's veto. And so if the president strikes a deal with the Ayatollah in Iran and Congress passes legislation over the president's veto, the president would be bound by what the Congress passed. And so it's possible that Congress would not have 2/3 and the president could veto the legislation and then keep his agreement with the Ayatollah. But Congress absolutely has a role. And I think especially in this case, when you're talking about negotiating an agreement about nuclear weapons with the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, a country that was responsible for funding the attack on our Marines in 1983 in Beirut. And as I mentioned earlier, that it was responsible for killing hundreds and hundreds of U.S. service members in Iraq. This is something that the American people absolutely deserve to weigh in on.
Let's talk for a moment about the letter that we heard Secretary Kerry reference, Tom Cotton's letter signed by 47 Republican senators. It was sent, an open letter, to the Iranian leadership. It apparently missed the fact that the foreign minister spoke English and was American trained, which he's being criticized for. Was that letter appropriate? Do you support its message and tone?
I think the letter was absolutely correct in pointing out to the Iranians that if they strike a deal with the United States that Congress does not approve, then it's not a deal that's ultimately going to need to be accepted by the Congress, and it's not going to be a deal that will need to be honored by future administrations. And so it was a basic statement of fact. I don't know what the hullabaloo about in Washington has been about. And even John Kerry in his testimony before the Foreign Relations Committee, he acknowledged that the agreement was not binding. And so I think it was a basic statement of fact. And, you know, I served with Tom Cotton in the House, and this is a guy who is very serious about protecting our national security, and he is very serious about denying Iran a nuclear weapon. And it wasn't something that he would do lightly.
Let's talk for a moment about Syria. You alluded to it earlier, this ongoing fight with ISIS. We're seeing these Christian populations rounded up, routinely and summarily killed. What option do we really have on the ground in Syria? I know we had a rebel force that it was reported a few weeks ago. The group that we were financing, the group that we were arming, has apparently given the field away, and some of them have joined the other fighters, Islamic fighters on the ground against the Syrian government. What is our option there? I know they're going to train 5,000 fighters, but how credible is this? Is this an appropriate foreign policy for the region?
Well, look, it's been an utter disaster in Syria. Part of the reason is this is about 3 years too late to have an opposition force to Assad. What you have now is basically a lot of Sunni Islamist fighters who are not that much further away from ISIS. Their main thing is to fight a sectarian conflict against Assad, and they absolutely are no friend of the Christians in that region. And so they've never really been a dependable ally. The idea that if we just arm these folks, then somehow that's going to advance America's security interests, I've always thought that that was problematic, and I think you're seeing that with the recent news where you have people armed by the United States turning over their weapons to the local al-Qaeda affiliate. And so what you have is a major humanitarian disaster, and it's something where we at this point do not have a good partner in Syria. What I would do is fight ISIS in Iraq with Kurdish forces, using Arab forces from other Gulf states. I think you do need more U.S. Special Operations forces. Once you succeed there, then I think you need to have some of these Arab troops that are going to be involved in the Syria campaign. But if you don't have that, then it's just going to be a bunch of bad guys fighting each other, and the losers are going to be innocent civilians and, as we've seen tragically, thousands of Christians.
Congressman, before I let you go, we only have a couple of minutes here. I know you spent some time at Guantanamo Bay, not behind bars. You were serving the country. Tell us for a moment your opinion of this ongoing rapprochement with the Cuban government, the Castro regime. There seem to be prisoner swaps underway, a lessening of the embargo or the hope of lifting it. That's what the president's hoping. Your take on this newfound openness between Cuba and the United States. Is this a good deal for the U.S. and the world?
No, the United States, we're getting nothing. These are purely unilateral concessions to the Castro regime. The Cuban people are not going to benefit from this. Any increased economic activity is going to benefit the military and the Castro dictatorship. And I think it's important for U.S. policy to stand on the side of the Cuban people who have been oppressed by the Castro regime for decades. And we've had a policy to try to hold the regime accountable, and people say, oh, well, it hasn't worked in the past, so let's just try something new. The problem with that argument is you got to look in the here and now, and who do these changes benefit? And I think the obvious answer is that they benefit the Castro regime. You have Venezuela and Russia, their two main patrons, are having a lot of economic problems due to world oil markets. They need an economic lifeline, and here is President Obama giving that to them. I think it's a huge mistake, and I think it makes it more difficult to bring freedom and democracy to the Cuban people.
Congressman Ron DeSantis, thanks for being here. We'll check in with you again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, what is the best way to achieve health, happiness, and heaven? Catholic League President Bill Donohue drops by to talk about his new book, The Catholic Advantage, and we'll get into the St. Patrick's Day Parade in New York and so much more. The World Over Live returns in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back. My next guest is the president of the Catholic League, a tireless defender of religious freedom here in the U.S. and abroad. He's also a sociologist by trade, to discuss some big stories of the week and his new book, which uses that trade very well, The Catholic Advantage: Why Health, Happiness, and Heaven Await the Faithful. Welcome, Bill Donohue. Bill,
how you doing, Raymond?
Welcome back to the program. Glad you could join us on set. This book is a big departure for you. Yeah, I mean, this is not Bill sort of taking on the culture. This is Bill Donohue, the sociologist. Why did you decide to talk about well-being, essentially?
Well, you know, I spend my day defending the Catholic Church against bigots, not against critics, but against people who, it's a judgment call, I think have hit below the belt. But why am I doing that? Well, because the Catholic Church, I believe, is the answer to our problems, individual problems and social problems. And what I've known for a number of years, for reasons I wasn't exactly sure of, that people of faith are much more likely to be of good mental and physical health and more likely to be happy. I wanted to try to explore that a little bit, and I thought, well, and the more I did, I'll be glad to describe. Yeah. But in the short answer to what you're saying is that the reason I defend the Catholic Church with such vigor is precisely because it does hold the ingredients to the good life.
This is the kinder, gentler Bill Donohue.
Well, people just judge me by beating up on liberals on TV, which I will continue to do, or anybody who thrashes the church. You don't have to be a liberal to do that. I should correct that. I've been dealt with a number of conservatives, particularly lately, who I don't think have been too fond of the Catholic Church, but whoever they might be. The fact of the matter is, I have a rougher edge when I'm debating somebody on air, but that's not the totality of who I am. And I think anybody who knows me, as you do, know that, not exactly news that I might have a soft spot.
No, but it's an this book relies a great deal on data, on real experience. We're going to get into it in a minute.
Right.
I want to draw you back into the Bill Donohue that people know and love.
The pugilistic Bill.
That we got to show. We got to bare the teeth a little bit, Bill.
Okay.
Cardinal Egan died in New York this week. There was an obit in the New York Times to which you took some offense. It called him a stern defender of Catholic orthodoxy who, quote, called the police to oust protesters from a church. Why were you so upset by this obit?
Well, let's just take the first part. Look, I don't mind if people want to be critical of Cardinal Egan or Cardinal Dolan or the Pope or myself or anybody. But the fact of the matter is, this is an obituary. It's supposed to be an obituary. Now, if you want to mention some shortcomings of anybody who's deceased, I think that's okay. This read as a negative editorial. I mean, they took these shots at him. I mean, first of all, what is the purpose of opening up by saying a stern defender of the orthodoxy? Is there any archbishop or bishop in the United States or any place in the world who we wouldn't expect to defend the orthodoxy? Don't they defend the orthodoxy of the editorial position of the New York Times at the New York Times? And why the sternness? I mean, stern or otherwise. What? And now they went after him because they said he defended the church's position on homosexuality, abortion. You know, they went right down the whole list because the entire corpus of Catholic teachings, according to the New York Times, deals with matters sexual. That's not true for Catholics, but that's the vision there. Now, the other part here, they're saying but he called the cops to get protesters out of a church. A couple of years ago in East Harlem, there were some people who didn't like the idea that they had to close one of the schools. That's my old area, and that is tough. There's no question about it. So what they did is they camped out in a church for a couple of days. Well, they sent in the priest. They said, "Would you please leave?" They won't leave. And so, of course, they had to call the cops at some point. You just don't. Now, if I took over, if I got some of my Irish buddies from my pub, and we showed up at the New York Times editorial office, and we decided we don't like the way you're handling things, we're going to be a squatter, we're going to hang out here for a while. Are they not going to call the cops on Bill Donohue? I mean, look, let's not try it, Bill. Well, I'll have to come bail you out. Right, I'll bring my baseball bats as well. Then they'll really call the cops.
Okay, all right, easy there. I said a little too rougher edge, not the baseball bat. All right. Let's talk about the St. Patrick's Day Parade, which you marched in for 20 years. You're not marching this year out of protest. They are allowing a gay group to march, just one, and a pro-life group that asked to march as well were denied acceptance into the parade. What's the problem here?
Well, here's the problem. Let's go back here. But for 20 years, I've been going on television and radio in New York and elsewhere, saying that the people who run the St. Patrick's Day Parade are not anti-gay any more than they're anti-life. My point was they don't allow people to march under their own banner for a cause. In other words, whether it's abortion or whether it's gay rights or whatever it is, if you're gay and you're pro-life and you want to march, I even went on the radio in New York City. So if you're gay, you want to march with me, that's okay, because I don't go around asking people what you do in bed and with whom as a condition of marching. Just blend in, pro-life and well. Well, so when they said, listen, we're going to allow one gay group in, some of the leaders of this, or of the parade committee, I said, so where's the pro-life group then? Because if you're going to break the precedent, and you said you're going to allow them in under their own banner, you have to have a pro-life. Some people said, well, Bill Donohue is equating pro-life with pro-gay. I'm not. I'm simply trying to say there's an equal platform here. Once you allow people for a gay cause, what about the pro-life cause? And they said, yes, there will be a pro-life cause group under their own banner. And then I found out I was lied to. And I'm not a person, I have my own integrity. I am not going to take this thing lying down. I don't like being lied to, so I pulled the Catholic League unit, and I made the right decision. I'm very proud of it. I wish everybody has a great time on St. Patrick's Day, but I'm not going to be used by people.
Cardinal Dolan is the Grand Marshal. There have been a lot of emails to me in the ensuing, really over the last few months since this erupted. Cardinal Dolan's there. What is the message? Is this an endorsement of the gay unit in the parade and this approach? Is the parade not a liturgy? It's not that important? Is it just another display, or is it a church-related activity?
Well, there are some people I know high up in the parade committee, not the guy who runs it, John Dunleavy. I think he's been used. But there are some other people who have a secular agenda. They want to take an Irish Catholic parade and turn it into an Irish parade. In other words, they want to neuter, they want to gut the Catholic element. They're very clear about it. I'm talking about Irish Central, Neil O'Dowd, the people who write for him, John Leahy, the president of Quinnipiac University, who's one of the organizers in this. I'm naming the names. They're there. And NBC, isn't that cute? They're the ones who put the parade on TV. Isn't it cute that the one gay group is from NBC? Isn't that cute? Now, look, they're playing games here, and what they want to do in 2016 is to have more gay groups come in there and crash the parade. Look, we have a gay pride parade in New York City. Fine, all right? Now, why can't people just blend in like everybody else? Why is it that people, I thought your sexual expression was something that was noted in private. Why does that have to have such a public display? I mean, this is what's happening, and the elites in New York, not just here with the parade committee. I'm talking about the financial elites, Wall Street. They're all pro-gay marriage. That's their business. I'm not in favor of two men getting married, but they're using the parade now to make a political statement, and I think it's abhorrent.
I want to talk about 4 Catholic publications. Came out, our Sunday Visitor, the National Catholic Reporter, America Magazine, and the National Catholic Register.
Right.
And they issued a statement saying the death penalty must end. That was the quote.
Right.
And that it's aberrant. They really were equating it with objective evil, practically. Your take on this?
Well, my feeling is this. The Catholic Church is presumptively opposed to the death penalty. That is to say, in almost all instances, it is not unequivocal. It leaves the door open in certain select instances. That's not the case with abortion. Abortion is intrinsically evil. There are no exceptions on abortion. Why didn't they, if they're concerned about life issues, begin with the most elementary right to life, the baby having a right to be born? Why did they begin with the serial murderers who are on death row as opposed to the innocent child in the mother's womb?
Well, they claim in a month there's going to be a Supreme Court case that's going to examine the death penalty.
Listen, the National Catholic Reporter is pro-abortion. All right? That's why they have for years allowed Francis Kissling and others to run their ads in Catholics. I've debated the people from National Catholic Reporter. I've asked them these questions on with Chris Matthews and others. So for them to get in there, I mean, it's a joke. In fact, I think the National Catholic Reporter is oftentimes patently anti-Catholic. Not all the writers. They've got some good people there. But there's been some things done there over the past number of years. No wonder a number of bishops have condemned them. I wouldn't be associated with them for anything.
I want to play this for you. This is Cardinal Avery Dulles, who I interviewed several times. And when you talk about this being verboten somehow in the church, the fact is, as you stated a moment ago, the Catechism allows, and the church has always traditionally allowed, capital punishment. Now, they say there's almost no reason to use it, but it leaves that to the discretion of the state, coldly administered with justice. Listen to Cardinal Dulles.
Never been any teaching that the death penalty is intrinsically evil. In fact, the contrary, I think, is taught even by the present Pope, who obviously doesn't particularly like the death penalty. I think he's opposed to it on pragmatic grounds. He says, no, there are circumstances where it is necessary to use the death penalty. Right. And, of course, the Church has been supported the death penalty down through the centuries, and there's a great deal in Scripture in support of the death penalty.
Cardinal Dulles referring there to John Paul II.
And what about an issue which is more pressing than the death penalty today? Leaving aside abortion, I've addressed that. It's called doctor-assisted suicide. Why don't we have people coming out with statements on that thing there? But I just think it's got a political overtone to it.
I want to get to your book before we run out of time. Where did this come from? This notion that, and the way you framed this, that if you want the 3 H's, health, happiness, heaven, you have to have the 3 B's. What are the 3 B's?
The 3 B's are beliefs, bonds, and boundaries. Beliefs, people of faith compared to people who have no faith, agnostics and atheists. Those are the I look at the Catholic vision and the secular vision. People of faith are much healthier in terms of mental health, much healthier in terms of physical health, much happier. I didn't make this up. I looked at all the research that's been done on this. In terms of heaven, I would argue that it's reasonable to conclude that people who are charitable in their giving, self-giving, as judged by contributions, by voluntarism, by blood.
How do you quantify heaven, Bill?
Well, you can't, but I'm saying certain kind of behavioral attributes, such as self-giving, charitable giving, and the like, and altruism. As an index of altruism, I chose the study by the Jewish couple, did a magnificent job, the altruistic personality. People of faith were the most likely to risk their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust, not the self-absorbed individualists. So if you, and by the way, on the agnostic atheist side, I look at Hollywood celebrities and intellectuals. Some people might say they have nothing in common, the airheads from Hollywood and the great deep thinkers in the professoriate. Well, they have one thing in common. The Hollywood celebrities have no time for God, and the intellectuals, of course, they're smarter than God. They don't need God. They are unhappy. They are not healthy. And in terms of charitable giving, these people who are decidedly on the left, they give the least amount of money than anybody in the United States. That's why Mississippi and Utah are at the top in giving, and the worst places, wherever the left lives, college towns, Providence, Rhode Island, Boston, Massachusetts, San Francisco, their idea of charity is to pick the pocket of the taxpayer through taxation, not to give of themselves.
You mentioned in the book that mass attendance and prayer actually extend your life. How does this happen?
Well,
what does the data tell us?
Well, the data tell us something like this. They even have these double-blind studies where they ask people to pray for someone whom they don't know, and the person being prayed for doesn't know that that person is being prayed for, and they do better. Now, I don't say that I have the answer to all these things. I am saying there's a clear difference between, and you take a look at the cloistered nuns, which I look at.
Right, you mentioned cloistered nuns at lunch.
Who's happier, the Kim Kardashians of the Hollywood crowd?
It would appear
who run
so,
around,
Bill.
Who bounce from one bed to the other, who always strung out,
but
these people?
Here's what they would say to you. They're jet setting.
Yeah.
They've got the attention of the world.
Yeah.
They're validated.
Right.
They can do whatever they want. Isn't that happiness, ultimate freedom?
I
restraints?
look at depression. I look at loneliness. I look at suicide, people who are suicidal. And why is it in broken relationships? Hollywood is loaded with them. The intellectuals, going back to Rousseau, right up through Hemingway, right up to today, my friend Christopher Hitchens. These people are miserable, chain-smoking, alcoholic, jet-setting, bed jumping. I mean, they are unhappy people. Why does Lady Gaga go to the psychiatrist all the time? Why does David Letterman go to the psychiatrist all the time? Why don't the cloistered nuns? Why are the cloistered nuns so happy? Why do they live so long? What about the saints? They had their dark moments, perhaps, and they started off often on the wrong foot. But when they got on the right foot with Jesus, boy, they made some tremendous strides. There's no question about it. Priests are the happiest of any occupation profession in the United States. Priests, contrary to what everything you've read. Now, if you want to find out misery, go meet the local professors. Go into Hollywood and meet some of those gals. And you want to meet the happy people, meet the priests, the nuns, particularly the cloistered nuns.
Yeah,
those are the people.
You spend a lot of time on cloistered nuns here and religious, particularly one very close to my heart, Mother Angelica and Mother Dolores Hart, who's been a guest on the show.
I have a section in the book about them. Two wonderful women.
Why? Why did you highlight those a lot?
Because, people have the idea that if you're a cloistered nun, you live in a cocoon, you're some kind of a nerd, you don't deal with the real world. Really, they deal with the people who show up at their door. People who are despondent, who are morally destitute, poor people who are, I don't mean just poor materially, but poor spiritually, people who are broken for all kinds of different reasons. And cloistered nuns, we have such a stereotype about them. They are the healthiest and happiest of any segment of the population. Hollywood women have an awful lot to learn from Mother Angelica and Mother Dolores.
Tell me for a moment, you talk about alcohol, drug use, crime,
right,
and that there's a connection, a profound one, to religiosity.
Absolutely, and promiscuity. I mean, the people who have, look, the people who have nothing in their life but themselves, the self-absorbed, they are the people most likely to be involved in crime, to take these crazy risks, to be involved with STDs. People of faith, practicing faith, not just nominal Catholics, by the way. They don't work out too well, as I pointed out in the book. I mean people who take their faith seriously. These people here don't wind up with the kind of maladies that affect the Hollywood crowd and the intellectuals, the professoriate, in terms of mental and physical disabilities, and they tend to be a lot happier.
Now, in the book, I mean, it's called The Catholic Advantage, but it really, many of the studies you cite are much broader than that. It's really people of faith. It's really believers as opposed to non-believers,
yes,
right?
it is, but most of the data in this country are obviously drawn from Catholics, Protestants, and Jews, so it's a little harder to get the data on the others. And I'd also say something, people who are spiritual but not religious don't do as well. All right, that comes out pretty clearly in the book as well.
Now that would seem to cut against everything you see and read, Bill.
Right.
Because
that's why one of the reasons I wrote the book is to debunk the mythology.
But, I mean, if you watch some of these shows,
right,
if you read some of the self-help books, and I've
right,
seen a good number of them, they say, look, spirituality, you're being fed, you're in touch with something out there,
right,
and you're not judging anyone else. And isn't that a better, cleaner way to live than you with your strictures and your judgmental attitude?
Well, if that were the case, then the people engaged in all these Eastern religions and yoga and meditation and stuff like that would be doing very well, but they don't do it. No, they're not. In fact, I go through that very, very clearly, and they bounce around from one religion to another. They keep wanting to find the easy way out. It's true. Catholicism raises the bar pretty high. I mean, Christianity, the Ten Commandments we got from our Jewish brothers and sisters, it's not easy to live that life. But better to set a high standard to try and clear it than to drop the bar so low that anybody can clear it. That's not the way. And the people, believe me, people are the healthiest and the happiest. And I rely a lot on Dr. Harold Koenig out of Duke University Medical Center, and all the other studies are there. I have it heavily footnoted because I don't want anybody to say, well, Bill Donohue just made this up. It's his opinion. Where did he get this stuff on epidemiology and the like? I got it from the natural scientists, and it took a faithful Catholic social scientist to explain it.
Who did you write this for? Who were you intending this book for when you started, and what do you think when you ended up?
Well, I mean, I think any person of faith will find something of wisdom, I hope, in this particular book. I think I want to make Catholics prouder. All they hear is negative news. Now, some of the negative news about the Catholic Church is indeed self-inflicted, but a lot of it is not. We're being bashed left and right, like Archbishop Cordileone out in San Francisco by these people out there to destroy him. And we have to fight back against them and these phonies out there. But quite frankly, there's so much about Catholics that's good. We do have an advantage, certainly over the agnostics and the atheists, the Hollywood crowd and the intellectuals. I mean, they're the ones who should envy us. I don't envy them. I don't want to be like them.
I'm going to ask my guest coming up, Rick Warren, what he's giving up for Lent. What is Bill Donohue giving up for Lent?
Well, it doesn't sound like much. I don't raise the bar too high, but this will come as a great surprise to you. I go to a pub, an Irish pub.
You do?
Yeah, and you know what they do? Noreen, this gal, she puts out popcorn all the time.
Oh, wait
and I'm always grabbing the popcorn.
Wait a minute.
I gave up the popcorn. I gave up the potato chips. I gave up all the salt stuff that goes with the beer.
But not the stuff in the glass.
No, listen, Cardinal Dolan does that, but he's a better Catholic than me.
Oh, boy, you are setting the bar low. Bill Donohue, thank you for being here. The book, The Catholic Advantage, Why Health, Happiness, and Heaven Await the Faithful, is available at bookstores everywhere, online, and through the EWTN Religious Catalog. To follow Bill Donohue and the work of the Catholic League, visit catholicleague.org. When we return, Pastor Rick Warren returns to talk about his fight against a proposed California law seeking to legalize physician-assisted suicide and who he's partnering with in the effort. The World Over continues in a moment. Stay right there.
once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My next guest is a giant in the evangelical community. He is the pastor and founder of Saddleback Church in Southern California. And he's now collaborating with the Catholic Diocese of Orange to fight a proposed physician-assisted suicide bill in California. I sat down with him recently here in D.C. He spoke with me about the so-called Death with Dignity movement, the power of prayer, and just what does an evangelical pastor give up for Lent. Here's my exclusive interview with Rick Warren. Lent. How are you preparing? How would you suggest others prepare during this period, these 40 days?
Well, I think leading up to Easter is a great time to focus on the internal life, our internal devotion to Christ. And I think that involves both prayer and Bible reading or Bible study. I call it a daily quiet time where you sit and you listen to God through His Word, and you talk to God through prayer. You can sing to God through singing. One of the things, many years ago I wrote a book. In fact, the first book I wrote was called Bible Study Methods. And it's still in print years later in a bunch of languages. And I talk about when you look at a text, how do you get the most out of it? There are 4 questions I ask. One is observation, and that is, what does it say? I read a story and I go, what does it say? And then I do interpretation. What does it mean? Okay, what is the meaning of it? For instance, when Jesus says, I am the door, He's not saying I'm a piece of wood. Okay, what does it mean? What does He mean when He's saying, I am the door? And what does it say? Observation, interpretation, what does it mean? Correlations. What else in the Bible helps me understand this? You always interpret unclear passages in light of clear ones. What does it say over here that sheds light on this one? And then the 4th is application. What am I going to do about it? And that's where we really see our life change in the application. What am I going to do about it?
What are you giving up for Lent? Are you?
I'm giving up dairy, I'm giving up sugar, and
Lord.
I'm giving up grains.
Anything you're not giving up?
Well, it fits on the Daniel plan, but it happens to really be my giving up.
I see a Lenten cross promotion.
It actually gives me a lot more energy, and it allows me to focus better. It's pretty much, meat and vegetables.
That sounds good.
I think it's actually good for us to make sacrifices, to
What's
remember
the
the
spirit?
sacrifice
People
of
look at
Christ.
that, some people, I've had friends come up and say, I know you give this stuff up, but what does that do for you?
Yeah.
Couldn't you pray to God and have a communion with God without it?
Yes, but I think it's kind of like turbocharging. It adds a little oomph to it. It's a reminder when my stomach sees some ice cream that I'd like to have, and I go, you know what? Just remember what Christians are sacrificing all around the world right now. Remember what our Lord did on the cross for us. Remember the sacrifices of great Christian believers and saints through history and the martyrs of history that preserved Scripture. Okay, that means this is a minor thing by comparison, but it just allows me to the Bible says that discipline is a good thing.
How do you pray, particularly during this period? And what do you say to those who, and they say it all the time,
Yes.
I've been praying for years for this thing, He doesn't answer me.
Yeah, right. Well, first place, the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, you can not only pray it itself, you can use it as a model. Jesus said, this is the model you could pray. And so when He says Our Father, this is the prayer of connection. And you think about how am I connected to Christ? God is my Father. And then, hallowed be thy name. And this is the prayer of holiness. And thy kingdom come, thy will be done, the prayer of surrender. Give us this day our daily bread, the prayer for provision. Forgive us our trespasses, the prayer of forgiveness and forgiving others. So the Lord's Prayer is not just a prayer to pray, it's a model for prayer. But somebody taught me years ago a little acrostic, ACTS. Everybody's heard this.
That's great.
Adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. And so I start with adoration, thanking God, praising God for who He is, adoration. Then confession, admitting to God who I am. Thanksgiving, thanking God in gratitude for all He's done. In supplication, making my request.
Usually everybody runs to the S.
Oh yeah,
They run right to the supplication,
Yeah, but
forget
you know what?
the rest.
I like it when my kids were small, they'd jump in my lap and they'd sit there and I'd say, what do you want, Amy? And she goes, I just want to be near you, Daddy. And that's the way God wants us to come to Him. That we're not always having a request. I just want to be near you, Father.
I want to talk about something that's happening in your neck of the woods in California. There is this bill before the legislature to legalize physician-assisted suicide.
Right.
Given the path you've been on since your son's suicide and the great efforts you've made to reach out to people with mental illness and in mental distress, is this bill going to help you in your work and help the people you've been serving?
Well, I'm totally opposed to the bill because I say I'm not just pro-life, I'm whole life. Okay, I don't want just that little baby girl to be born. I want her to grow up safe, secure, get a good education, not be raped, not be abused. So I'm whole life. And whole life means even to the other end of life, of opposing euthanasia. And there's such a slippery slope on this. Well, you know, we're somebody who's terminal, you know, the Dutch have now basically said, if I feel like my life isn't worth it, then I can take my life.
Sure, depression.
Yeah, and so I'm opposed to physician-assisted suicide. First, it's the opposite of the Hippocratic Oath, which says first do no harm. The job of a doctor is preserve life, not to help take life. So that's nonsense. And we are working with other Christians and people of goodwill. You know, in Orange County, Saddleback Church took the lead on mental health, and the Diocese of Orange supported us in that. And now the Diocese of Orange is taking the lead in opposing this bill, and we're supporting them in that. In fact, I just met with Bishop Kevin Van and the team there at the diocese office on this very issue, saying you have our full support, just like you're supporting us in the mental illness cause, because we believe this has to be dealt with.
The Orange County Register just said this is not, physician-assisted suicide is not a moral or a religious issue.
Yeah.
You would say what?
Well, I would say that's a blindness. It's just not true, because every issue is a moral issue. To say, anytime you talk about law, you have moral behind it, okay? You have to put up a stop sign. There's a reason for that. And we believe that it's good that people don't get banged into. And so anytime you make any law, there's always a morality behind it. People say you can't legislate morality. Nonsense. Every law is morality.
Tell me about that relationship quickly between you and Bishop Van. This has been an interesting partnership based on a real relationship here.
Well, it started off as a friendship. And one of the things I believe in reaching out to other people, not just fellow Christians, but to people who aren't believers, is you start with the hands, and then you move to the heart, and then to the head. In other words, what can we do together? In other words, I'm not really interested in debating our doctrinal differences as much as saying, what do we have in common? And it first started off with Bishop Van when he was installed as the new bishop. And I had known the two previous bishops and had been friends with them, Todd Brown and Norman McFarland, prior to that. And I went to his installation and just met a man of great humility and great love, and we fell in love with each other, became prayer partners. We actually text all the time and on that. And when my son died, Matthew died, Bishop Van called me and said, what can we do about this? And I said, well, let's do a conference. And so we got University of California at Irvine involved, and now we actually put together a coalition of some hospitals in the area that are working on childhood, pediatric, psychiatric beds, and some things that weren't there. And a lot of good has come out of it, and we're just dear friends.
Join us for more of my conversation with Pastor Rick Warren on the March 26th edition of The World Over. He'll be joined by the director of Georgetown University's Religious Freedom Project, Tom Farr. We'll discuss religious liberty in the U.S. and abroad. You won't want to miss that. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. And you can also sign up for my free e-blast. I'll send you exclusive news you won't find anywhere else and links to each week's show segments. Don't miss next week's show. Randy Boyagoda, the author of the new biography of the late, great Father Richard John Newhouse, is here. We'll remember him. And we'll talk about money and investments with George Schwartz, the founder and CEO of Ave Maria Mutual Funds. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.